We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 63a. On the previous Amud, Rabba said that there's a distinction. If the seller says Meitzer Arad Mina Palga, he ends the statement with the boundary of the land of which is half. And if he says Meitzer Arad Mina Psika, Psika means it's set apart. And the distinction Rabba made was if he says the word Palga at the end, if he says the word half at the end, his intention is to sell half of the land. If he says the word Psika at the end, that it's set apart, then his intention is just to sell an amount of land that is considered to be chashiv, that's considered to be significant, which again we said on the previous Amud is it's enough land that you can plant 9 kav of seed. Abaya then said back to Rabba, is there really a distinction between these two different lashonos, between these two different languages that can be used? Rabba was silent, and Abaya thought that meant that Rabba agreed with what he was saying, but the Gemara now says velohi, it's not true. The Amar Rav Yemer Bar Shalmiya, because Rav Yemer Bar Shalmiya says L'didi mefarshali mine de Abaya, it was explained to me from Abaya as follows: Bein meitzer arad mina palga, whether you use the language of meitzer arad mina palga, uvein meitzer arad mina psika, or whether you use the language of meitzer arad mina psika. I Amar le ilain mitzranaha, if he says to him when he's selling the property, he says these are the boundaries. If he uses that phrase, then palga, then we say that he's selling him half. Lo amar le ilain mitzrana, but if he doesn't say ilain mitzrana, if he doesn't say these are the boundaries, then tishakab, and then he's just selling him the amount of land upon which you plant 9 kav of seeds. And the Rashbam explains, Yamar le v'ilain mitzrana, if he says v'ilain mitzrana, so then we assume that the seller is selling half the property. Meitzar mizrach arad mina palga, meitzar ma'irav ploni v'chein holech v'choshev kolam etzarim. Meaning in the sale, he mentions all of the various boundaries. V'hilka chai v'ilain mitzrana, and therefore when he adds the words v'ilain mitzrana, yisur lashonu, that's just extra words. You don't need to say that if you already said meitzar mizrach arad mina palga, meitzar ma'irav, etc. You already said all of that. Why are you adding the phrase v'ilain mitzrana? You're just adding an extra language, and the idea is liyapos kocha, that essentially strengthens the sale, and in this case says that he's selling him half of the property. Well, a kaman b'shmaita nami chazina yisur lashon tuva liyapos koch. We're going to see later on in the sugya also this idea that just extra language can sometimes indicate a strengthening of the sale. And the Rashbam continues, v'achi kamar Abaya le'el, according to this understanding, this is what Abaya was saying earlier, what's the difference if you use the word palga or the word psika? The way we understood it at first was that when Rabba was silent, the idea of the question was that it should always be half, and that's what Abaya was suggesting, but now we're saying that's not the case. What Abaya was saying was, haloin chiluk bein palga le psika, there's no difference between palga and psika, elazimnin amrinan betarvayu palga, bein psika, hecha damar v'ilain mitzrana. Rather, it all depends on v'ilain mitzrana. It doesn't matter whether you say palga or psika. What actually matters is whether you say ilain mitzrana or not. If you say ilain mitzrana, then we assume that it's half, v'zimnin tishakav, and sometimes it's 9 kav, hecha de lo amar v'ilain mitzrana, when the words v'ilain mitzrana is not stated. And so essentially the Gemara is slightly revising its understanding of Abaya that it had before. Before, the Gemara understood that Abaya was saying there's no difference between the two languages and it should always be half. And now the Gemara is understanding there's no difference between the two languages, and whether it's half or not is dependent on a different phrase, specifically the phrase of ilain mitzranaha. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Pshita is obvious. Amar yachlok ploni ben achasai. If a person says so and so should divide among my property, so palga, that means he's giving him half of the property. Tenu chelik leploni ben achasai. If he says give a chelik, give a portion to so and so of my property, so what is the halacha? Meaning, what is he actually giving this person? Amar Ravina Bar Kisi says, Tashma, come and hear the following proof from a brisa, the Tanya, as we learned in a brisa. Ha'omer tenu chelik leploni bebor. If a person says, give a chelik to so-and-so in this pit, Sumchis Omer, Sumchis says, ein pachos miravi. You don't give him less than a quarter, it means a quarter, and essentially, as we'll see in the Rashbam, that's the answer over here as well. When he says tenu chelik, it means a quarter. And the brisa here continues, l'chavis. Let's say he says, give a portion to so-and-so of my bor, from my bor, for his chavis, so then you divide it in half again, ein pachos mishminis, then it's not going to be less than an eighth. And l'kedeira, if he says for the kedeira, for the pots, ein pachos miyud beis, then it's not going to be less than 1/12. And l'tfiach, if he says l'tfiach, which is a cup, ein pachos mishisha aser, then it's not going to be less than 1/16. And the Rashbam explains, l'chavis ein pachos mishmona. Again, if he adds the word l'chavis, a barrel, then he doesn't get less than an eighth. Kilomar means to say, imamar tenu chelik leploni bebor l'chavis. If the phrase is, give so-and-so a portion of the pit for the barrel, meaning kedei lemalos chavis, in order to fill up a barrel, the hainu lahashkos behemosav v'lo lahashkos adosav. The point is, he's going to use it to give to drink to his animals rather than to irrigate his fields. So then we say, in pachos mishmon, it's not less than an eighth bebor. It's 1/8 of whatever whatever's in the pit. And the idea is as follows: Mishum dechatzi habor tzarich l'chavis. You need half of what's in the pit for the barrel. V'chi kamar chelik, and the word chelik, what does the word chelik mean? Dilma palga dechavis ka'amar. Maybe it means half of the barrel. Dahainu revia habor, which would end up being a quarter of the pit. O mashu kamar, or the word chelik might mean mashu, just the smallest amount. And so we just take what's in between. Hilkach yesh lo chatzi revia. Therefore, we take the in between, which is a half of a quarter. Dahainu echad mishmona. It means to say 1/8. Uvashita zu yesh lefarish kulam. That's how we explain everything over here. And so originally, when we say you take a chelik of the boar, the idea is, what does it mean, a chelik of the boar? It could mean half of the boar, or it could mean a mashu, a tiny amount. And so we take whatever is in between. We take exactly 1/4. That's why we say that chelik means 1/4. And the Rashbam continues, l'kedeira, let's say he uses the word kedeira, meaning tenu chelik leploni bebor lesakin machalo. Give him a portion of the water in the pit for the purposes of making his food. So then ein pachas miyud beis, then it's not going to be less than 1/12. Dahainu revia shir haroy l'kedeira. That happens to be 1/4 of the amount that's fit l'kedeira. Mishum dilma palga kamar, because again, maybe he means to say half. Umaman hamutal b'savich cholka, but we're not sure if he means half or a mashu. So therefore we say it's a quarter, which ends up being 1/12 of what's in the pit. And finally, l'tfiach, for the cup, kli katan lishtos bo b'nei adam, you give him a little that he's going to drink from. V'hai shir zutar mikulu, that's the smallest shir. V'hilkach gabe tenu chelik leploni benachasai, and so therefore coming back to the original question, when it says tenu chelik leploni benachasai, yitol revia means a quarter. The dilma palga kamer, because maybe he means half. O dilma shava pruta kamer, maybe he means a tiny amount. Umaman hamutal b'safik cholkin, and any time you have a situation of maman hamutal b'safik, where there's a situation of doubt, so you divide, and we say it's a quarter. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ben Levi shemachar sadali Yisrael, if a Levi sells a field to a Yisrael, V'yamarlon, he says to the Yisrael, Al minas shemaiser rishon shali, I'm selling you this field on the condition that the maiser rishon from this field, it belongs to me. Generally, you can give maiser rishon to any Levi, and this particular seller who is a Levi is saying that he wants the maiser rishon. So that stipulation is effective. Maiser rishon shalo, the maiser rishon is his. V'yamar liv ulevanai, let's say he says, I want it for myself and for my children. So then if he dies, Yitan Levanov, so then that maiser rishon is given to his children. V'yamar alone, if he says to him, Kol zman sha'asad zu biyodcha, that this stipulation should be in effect as long as this field is in your possession. So mochra v'chazar v'loch, if the buyer goes out and sells the field and then buys it back from the person he sold it to, ein lo olav klum, he's not responsible to give him any of the maiser rishon anymore, because the stipulation is no longer in effect once he gets rid of the field and sells it to somebody else. Once the buyer sells that field to someone else, that stipulation is no longer in effect. And the Gemara asks in general, Amai, why should this stipulation ever work, that the seller can say, I get the maiser rishon? Ein od makna davar shelo bo liolam. You can't make a kinyan on something that doesn't exist. You can't give something that doesn't exist. In this case, the produce hasn't yet grown. There is no maiser rishon yet, so how is he able to acquire the maiser rishon before it exists? And the Gemara answers to this, Kevon do Amar Le, since the seller says to the buyer, Al minas shemaiser rishon shali, that I'm selling you this property on condition that the maiser rishon is mine, so we understand that to mean that shiyure shaire l'makom maiser, what he's really doing is, he's leaving for himself the area where the maiser will grow, meaning a certain area of the field still belongs to the seller, and that's how he's acquiring the maiser rishon. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reish Lakish says, Zos Omeres, from this halacha we see, Hamocher bayis l'chaver, let's say a person sells a house to his friend, V'yomer lo, he says to him, Al menas shediyoto ha'elyona shali, I'm selling you this house on condition that the upper story is mine, the upper floor is mine, so that stipulation works, diyoto ha'elyona shalo, that upper floor is going to be his, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Beis.